Good afternoon. My name is Isabel Rohr, and I'm the Manager of Academic Programs and Outreach at JDC Archives. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar. We are thrilled that so many of you have joined us this afternoon. Today's webinar is organized in the context of the Bernard and Molly Stower JDC Archives Fellowship, which was established in 2019 with the generous gift from Dr. Sorrell and Lauren Chassin to honor the grandparents of Sorrell. The fellowship enables scholars engaged in graduate level, postdoctoral, or independent research to conduct research in the JDC archives. Our speaker today, Dr. Sari Siegel, is a postdoctoral fellow in the program in the history of medicine at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles and a visiting assistant professor at UCLA. After receiving her PhD in history from the University of Southern California, for her dissertation between coercion and resistance Jewish prisoner physicians in Nazi camps, Dr. Siegel was the 2018-2019 Geoffrey Hartman Postdoctoral Fellow at the Yale University Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies. She has published several articles. Her recent publications include The Coercion Resistance Spectrum, Analyzing Prisoner Functionary Behavior in Nazi Camps. It was published in the Journal of Genocide Research Online in May 2020, and it is slated for publication in the first or second issue of 2021. Her current project at the JDC Archives examines the roles and experiences of Jewish DP physicians who provided medical care to fellow Holocaust survivors in DP camps and health facilities in post-war Germany. Our format is that the guest speaker will speak for about 45 minutes. This will be followed by Q&A, and you are to send questions via the Q&A function on the Zoom, and this will be, you can send your question at any time during her lecture.
Hello, thank you so much to the JDC and Sorrell Chassin in particular for making this fellowship possible. I would also like to give thanks to Isabel Rohr, who just gave me that kind introduction, for being a great point of contact throughout the fellowship, and to the tech people for helping our transition to Zoom. So my postdoctoral project, supported by the JDC, is called Healing After the Holocaust, Jewish DP Physicians and the Provision of Medical Care to Fellow Survivors in Germany, 1945 through 1950. It is in some ways a chronological extension of my dissertation project between coercion and resistance, Jewish prisoner physicians in Nazi camps, 1940 through 1945. My research focuses on DP physicians and their provision of medical care to fellow survivors. Currently, I'm in an early phase of research for this project, and I look forward to suggestions regarding the project's direction during the Q&A session that will follow my talk. Through my transition from one project to another, I am keeping a few things constant. Both projects have me studying Jewish doctors in camps, although in drastically different circumstances. In a few cases, I am actually studying the same individuals before liberation from Nazi camps and after liberation. I'm also approaching the history in a similar manner, through the consideration of the doctors in both macro and micro contexts. My dissertation research uncovered just how fruitful this approach can be. More specifically, on the one hand, it enabled me to detail how various parties were involved in the recruitment and assignment of Jewish doctors to carry out medical duties in different camps. This included not only camp administrators, but also public and private business interests and multiple levels of government, ranging from municipal offices to the Ministry of the Interior on the federal level. And on the other hand, I revealed how individual doctors navigated ever-changing conditions to do the best they could to render aid to their fellow inmates in environments that often put adherence to the Hippocratic Oath and survival at odds with each other. The approach also led me to create a methodology, the coercion resistance spectrum, to facilitate the study of prisoner functionary groups beyond just prisoner physicians. Doctors are ideal points of connection between macro and micro contexts because they can simultaneously serve their patients as well as the larger interests invested in the health and productivity of the patient population. As such, my new project endeavors to study both the DP physicians' efforts to care for their fellow Holocaust survivors and the role that these doctors played in larger relief and rehabilitation initiatives, like those of the JDC and the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, or UNRWA, in the post-war years. I will provide insight today into Jewish DP circumstances in post-war Germany and the development of healthcare for this population of precariously weak and ill Holocaust survivors. I will discuss the trajectory of two DP physicians as examples and conclude with an examination of a particular archive file that grabbed my attention and drew me to consider survivor physicians' transition from DP camp doctors to emigrants. These relief and rehabilitation initiatives were confronted with massive populations of displaced persons as the war came to a close. In fact, millions of DPs from countries throughout Europe found themselves in what had just been the so-called Greater German Reich. To manage these DP populations, Allied military forces began to create camps in which the DPs could be kept apart from the general public and sheltered, presumably temporarily. In the first few months after fighting ceased, over 4 million DPs were already back in their countries, but many remained, including hundreds of thousands of Jews, who had no desire to be repatriated to countries whose populations largely supported and even assisted the Nazis' persecutory and exterminatory measures against Jews and continued to engage in anti-Semitic violence after the war. DP camps arose in many different kinds of facilities, including former concentration camps, labor camps, and military bases. There was also St. Attilian, indicated in red, which was established in a Benedictine monastery in Upper Bavaria, Germany. The establishment of a DP facility on that site was chiefly the result of one man's perseverance, Dr. Zalman Grinberg of Kovno, Lithuania. According to an account published in 1948 and kindly shared with me by Avinoam Pat, Grinberg first heard about the monastery when he was looking for a medical facility where at least 200 sick, starving, and injured former concentration camp inmates could receive desperately needed treatment once they found themselves abandoned by guards near the village of Schwabhausen in late April 1945. At that point, St. Attilian had served as a German military hospital for several years, and Allied troops had yet to reach it. Pretending to be a representative from the International Red Cross, Grinberg convinced the chief medical officer at the hospital to send ambulances for the transfer of some of the most severe cases to the hospital. The German officer refused to admit any further survivors, claiming that the hospital was beyond capacity. But he soon lost his authority as an American soldier arrived on the scene and placed Grinberg in charge of medical matters. By mid-May, the hospital, whose facilities are indicated by red arrows, had about 2,100 patients, a combination of German soldiers and liberated Jews. The number of German patients declined as the soldiers were moved to other hospitals, and the number of Jewish patients rose, especially after a May 27th agreement with the US military that Jewish patients in Dachau were to be brought to St. Attilian for treatment by the Jewish medical staff, led by 3 Jewish doctors, Grinberg included, who in turn oversaw the work of remaining German medical staffers. Because St. Attilian had served as a medical facility for German soldiers, Grinberg and his staff took over a hospital that had state-of-the-art equipment and resources, a rare occurrence for DP doctors. 15 Jewish doctors ended up on staff there. Approximately 6,100 patients were treated at the DP hospital during its existence between late April 1945 and May 6, 1948, and that includes hundreds of babies delivered there. In addition to his role at St. Ottilian, Grinberg was the president of the Central Committee of the Liberated Jews in the American Zone, an advocacy group that played a major role in organizing life for Jews in DP camps. Among their responsibilities was the establishment of healthcare systems. In the first months after liberation, there was a lack of clarity as to which entity, the US military or UNRWA, was responsible for providing medical supplies for the medical treatment of DPs. On November 15, 1945, however, things became clearer as the US military handed over control of the DP camps to the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, or UNRWA. Other organizations played important roles in the administration of DP camps as well, and in the case of Jewish DP camps, the key organization was the Joint Distribution Committee, the JDC. In matters of healthcare, a specific relationship between the JDC, UNRWA, and the CCLJ took shape. The point of the JDC's medical program was to support and supplement the UNRWA medical program in Germany. The UNRWA had to clear the JDC's medical program, and the JDC also needed to coordinate with the health department of the CCLJ. When it came to hiring doctors, district or regional health officers of the CCLJ were responsible for proposing clinical personnel to the district medical officer, who would be in charge of passing doctors' names and qualifications along to the zone medical officer, who in turn passed that information along to the Central Committee's Central Health Department, which had to verify the doctor's medical credentials. The final decision rested with the zone medical officer, who was then responsible for assigning individual doctors to particular clinical posts based on need. The goal was for the zone medical officer to have a collection of doctors whom he could place in medical facilities. The final bureaucratic step was the submission of the doctors' names and qualifications to UNRWA. The zone medical officer was not only making the final decision about hiring, but also about firing. He had to do so, though, in consultation with the Central Committee's health department. So what does all this mean for Jewish DP doctors? The doctors within the health department of the Central Committee could not act autonomously. Medical officers of the JDC had to be involved in every step along the way. And it was the JDC that established the medical programs that DP doctors had to execute. While final decisions on hiring and firing rested with the JDC zone medical officer, he, and I say he because all were men, in turn could not operate entirely autonomously either, as he had to keep UNRWA medical officials abreast of personnel matters, and the US military government added a further piece to the mix. While such matters were the responsibility of zone-level medical officers, it was the district medical officers who, in collaboration with the UNRWA, were responsible for the establishment of medical facilities according to the needs of the Jewish population. Such facilities included psychiatric facilities, tuberculosis clinics, pre- and postnatal clinics, and hospitals, like the Rittberg Hospital in Berlin in 1946. The Jewish hospital in Berlin stood in the French zone, and the JDC recognized the need for the US zone to have its own hospital, as 70 Jewish DP patients were scattered among the zone's German civilian hospitals. The Rittberg Hospital was a well-equipped 130-bed medical facility, and in October 1946, the JDC arranged for 100 of those beds to be permanently reserved for Jewish patients to be overseen by Jewish DP doctors. One of those doctors was Dr. Leon Falik, who survived the war as a military doctor in the Soviet and then Polish armies. Like so many Jews who survived by escaping to the Soviet Union, Falik made his way to Germany via Poland, specifically to the US zone in Berlin, where he received his DPID on July 23rd, 1946 at the Dupel Center, also known as the Schlachtensee DP camp. He received his Berlin ID papers on August 16th, 1946. According to this document, on July 1st, 1946, Falik began work in the gynecology department of the hospital at UNRWA DP camps Schlachtensee and Mariendorf, where his tasks included delivering babies and treating gynecological ailments, and he began work at the Rittberg Hospital in October. He divided his time among the three locations, seeing patients at Mariendorf on Mondays and Wednesdays between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., at Schlachtensee on Tuesdays and Fridays between 3 and 5 p.m., and every day at the Rittberg Hospital from 9 to 11 a.m. He estimated that he examined 8,000 Jewish women overall before he emigrated. On January 8th, 1947, he departed from Bremen on the Marine Marlin bound for New York. He entered the US on January 25th, 1947. He gave a deposition in July in New York to establish that he was the same person who, under his birth name, Mordechai Lieb, received a college diploma and credentials to practice medicine in Poland. It was with his later name, after he dropped his first name and altered his middle name to Leon, that he applied for admission to take the New York State medical examinations. He passed the exams in May 1947. I mentioned this to point out that there is a very interesting subject looking at what happened to the doctors post-emigration, and I have to decide whether that is something I would like to include in my project. So to go back to Dr. Grinberg, when he left St. Attilian for Palestine in July 1946, many Jewish doctors remained behind and patients' medical needs continued to be met. But when Falik and another DP medical colleague departed their posts in December 1946, JDC Berlin official Irvin I. Tates bemoaned, quote, "We lost two capable DP physicians through emigration. One of them was an obstetrician and gynecologist who was in charge of the corresponding clinics in the camps," end quote. Tates reported that Falik's emigration left Berlin's DP camps with no obstetrician gynecologist, a critical specialist in light of the DP baby boom. And in late 46 into 47, we are talking about massive numbers of babies being born within the DP, Jewish DP population. So the JDC recognized that there was a problem with the departure of DP doctors. It could leave the Jewish DP population without sufficient medical attention, particularly with certain specialties. So the JDC file that grabbed my attention, to which I referred at the beginning, is a file called Stipendium, depending on the language, Plan 1949. And it reveals that the JDC eventually took measures to keep Jewish survivor physicians on staff to continue attending to the medical needs of thousands of DPs that remained in Germany. To do so, the JDC established a bonus, stipendium, scholarship, all those names were applied to it, plan as an incentive for Jewish survivor physicians to put off emigration. Quote, one of the primary motives for the scholarship plan was to create a perpetuity of medical services in the camps during this most critical period, end quote, a period that began in late 1948 as more and more DPs left for their destinations, whether Palestine or at that point, Israel, the United States, Britain, British territories, and DP physicians were leaving as well. So as such, quote, the rules set down by the scholarship plan stipulated that a doctor must work a minimum of 7 months in order to receive the bonus, end quote. The bonus to which they're referring is 3 months worth of pay to put towards their continuing medical education in their final destination. Because presumably, in having been in the camps or the Soviet Union, these doctors had missed out on keeping up with the latest findings, new medications that were introduced, treatment protocols, etc. So the JDC recognized that for the doctor's own professional betterment, they would benefit from funding for their updating of their education. So this collection of documents, which contains the document here, so I would like to draw your attention to it. So it is located in this file as it was attached to a request by Dr. Jacob Dornberg for his bonus. So Dr. Jacob Dornberg, who has been employed as medical officer at Assembly Center Vorenwald, is at this time processed to Funkkaserne, awaiting his final departure for the USA. Dr. Dornberg came to this office, that being the Office of the International Refugee Organization, this is successor organization to UNRWA, to discuss whether it would be wise to delay his departure in order to complete his contract, which will end by April 1st, 1949. Dr. Dornberg is strongly advised by this office not to delay his departure, since it would only lead to complications. So the contract to which Ms. Lotte Lotheim is referring was the 7-month contract in order to qualify for the stipend. Dornberg that is, obviously wanted to fulfill the contract, to stay the 7 months and thus earn the bonus for himself and by staying, provide medical care that was desperately needed in the DP camps. But that plan was interrupted by evidently his papers coming through. He had a window of opportunity to emigrate, and Ms. Lotheim is suggesting that he not delay because that could lead to complications. So what these documents point out is this critical transition from caregivers to emigrants. It was not just a matter of logistics, but also identity. It raises the question of which identity or purpose would take precedence, the displaced person who needed to move on with his or her life in a new country, versus the doctor who was expected to continue to care for the patient population that remained in the DP camps. So as I proceed with this project, if I'm looking at this issue, I need to determine whether to approach it from the angle of the doctors. Do I look at it that I'm telling the story of the doctors who move? Do I take the position or the voice of the agency, the JDC, which is trying to incentivize doctors to stay longer for the continuation of medical care in DP camps? Or do I just take on both voices and analyze? So these are so many questions that I have moving forward. And as I said, I am really open to suggestions that the audience may have in addition to answering questions. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Sari, for a very interesting lecture. I see that we already have a few questions. Please send us more. So I will start with one of the first questions. Thank you for your informative lecture. I'm curious to know what your research has uncovered regarding the interaction between the Jewish survivor physicians at the start of the DP camp period and the Volksdeutsche and German doctors. Also, what can you tell us about the medical studies offered by UNRWA in Munich and possibly elsewhere for Jewish DPs?
Thanks for your question. So there was some tension in some locations between Jewish doctors, Jewish DP doctors, and German doctors with whom they were expected to work. In other locations, I found that there was much less tension. So these were observations written down in UNRWA records that I came across. So it really depended from one location to another, and I'm guessing evolved over time. As for your question about studies in Munich, that is a subject that I have yet to delve into because of where I'm at in my research, but it's something I can note and pursue in the future. So thank you.
Another question we have is, who paid the DP doctors, UNRWA or the JDC?
That is a good question. I am trying to get a sense of that from the documents. So to be perfectly honest, I am what I tried to do today was to weave a story, to offer some insight into this project at its early stages. As I'm sure all of you out there have experienced with COVID-19, all plans have sort of gone into the wind, and I'm not as far along as I was hoping to be at this point, but I am super excited by what I've found so far and look forward to digging deeper. And hopefully during future presentations of this work, I will be able to answer all of these questions.
Are there any list of patients in the various DP camp hospitals?
Yes, one thing I've come across due to the amazing work of Brother Cyril Schaefer at St. Attilian. He's put together a brilliant website, and there's a link to the first patient list that was drawn up, and then there's a notice that for additional patient lists, because of confidentiality reasons, one should look at the International Tracing Service records. So there are patient lists, and what's gone on at St. Attilian is that some of the children born there have returned. So there's continuity over time, a connection between patients and the facility where they were born.
Have you been in touch with some of those who were, this is my own question.
Oh, okay.
Have you been in touch with those who were born and went back? Like, have you encountered such people who were born in those camps and went back?
I would love to be, and because I've been in touch with Brother Schaefer and also Avinoam Pat, I believe that that communication gap can be easily remedied, and I can get in touch. And one thing that is incredibly exciting is I also hopefully will have the opportunity to communicate with the son of Dr. Grinberg, who himself is a Dr. Grinberg. And I learned from another scholar that the number of children of DP doctors who became doctors themselves was incredible. So that's something else to look at entirely.
We have another very interesting question. How did their experience during World War II impact their identities as doctors in the DP camps?
I haven't come across that yet because I haven't really looked into the personal accounts. As I mentioned, I want to approach this project from both macro and micro vantage points. So with the micro approach, I intend to gather accounts, also to look at video testimonies during sort of a cursory glance of what is available, at least online to me right now. I don't have a voice of the doctors themselves. I have voices of patients. So hopefully I can fill that in through memoirs and other written accounts in other locations, and bring those voices into the mix, because that's a huge component of what I'm trying to do.
So someone thanks you for a fascinating talk and asked you a little bit about your sources, where you found them. I saw references to the USHMM archives, but I wondered about the photographs of the DP medical facilities, etc.
Right. So the photographs from St. Attilian come from that amazing website that I mentioned. Brother Schaefer has gathered photos, I think some from the family members of the doctors there, of patients, many sources. So that has been a gold mine for me. So yes, I'm going to be mining the sources of USHMM. That is that originally was supposed to start right around now with a trip to DC. However, that has been put off or delayed because of COVID-19. That trip was also supposed to include visits to the National Archives, so I could look at military government records to see things from their point of view. So that's the macro. So unfortunately, I'm sort of hobbled by circumstances now, but I'm very grateful that so many archives have digitized materials, so I could come up with the material from USHMM. And I can't say how appreciative I am and sort of awed that the JDC has digitized as much as they have. It is really a gift to researchers all across the world to find material. And the Stipendium file is actually located in Israel. So thanks for saving me a really long trip. So it just having it at my fingertips is such a blessing.
Thank you. We have a number of other questions. Can you talk about the continuity between Jewish prisoner physicians in Nazi camps and DP physicians?
So thanks for your question. As I alluded to earlier, I've actually in the research for this new project, I've actually come across some familiar names, and that was a welcome surprise. I need to dig deeper and get their voices. Right now, I have records that mention them, that they were doctors in, so for instance, a Dr. Leitner, Wolf Leitner, he was a doctor in forced labor camps for Jews in Silesia. And then he became the chief medical officer in Forenwald. As of now, I don't have his voice so much. However, through fortuitous circumstances, I'm now in touch with his son, who will provide me with more of Dr. Leitner's voice. And hopefully through that connection, I can get a sense of at least his thoughts on being a prisoner physician. However, Mr. Leitner, the son, said that he really doesn't have much insight from his father about the later period. Another doctor whose name I found sort of on both sides of the liberation divide is Julius Spanier. And right now, I would love to track down his voice. I don't know if I can get at it from the DP side. In my research for the dissertation project, I have his voice in accounts that he gave for legal matters for the prosecution of war criminals. So I get some insight into what he was doing, the context for his work in the collection camps in Munich. But I would love to be able to get his voice on the later half. And in terms of Dr. Grinberg the Elder, so I have a snippet of his voice from the from sort of the later part, and I would love to be able to gain some insight into his recollections of his experiences as a prisoner physician before liberation.
We have many questions, Harry, so I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of them, but if not, I can always forward them to you.
Sure.
Have you found any diaries or other first-person accounts from the physicians involved?
So what I mentioned, the source that I got from Avinoam Pat was sort of a written account by Dr. Grinberg for publication in I believe a periodical of the Jewish National Fund. So I'm hoping, I don't think he kept a diary, but I'm looking forward to communicating with his son to get as much insight as I can, and excited the possibility that there are more sources out there. But as I believe I mentioned before, I need to get the voices of the doctors still. So at this really, really early stage, I have not come across diaries. I've come across brief mentions of recollections of being DP doctors. So I believe it was a memoir of Dr. Glenwick, and there are just a couple paragraphs in which he provides information about his time as a DP physician in a DP camp in Germany. So they're out there. It's just how much substance can I pull from those accounts? So that's to be seen.
How are Jewish DP doctors organized in the British zone, still by nationality before the British gave into the Jews' demands to separate them from other nationalities, or did they have to care for everyone on an equal basis, so to speak? Do you?
So right now I haven't looked into the British zone, and at least for this preliminary stage of the project, I'm limiting myself to the US zone. That said, however, in following the trajectories of several prisoner physicians from my dissertation research beyond liberation in Belsen, I have insight into what went on in Belsen specifically. So, and the Hone camp. So there it was pretty much just Jews who were treating Jews.
Did German medical personnel treat Jewish patients?
Yes, and that was a very emotionally traumatizing experience for survivors who made it through the camps knowing that German doctors were in charge of life and death decisions and had blood on their hands sent in total well over 1 million Jews just by the pointing of a finger to the crematoria in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and all of the stories about horrible medical experimentation and torture. So coming out of that environment, having the knowledge of what German Nazi SS doctors had done, to be encountering them on the other side of liberation was very difficult. And I read in Atina Grossman's book that a friend of hers mentioned that her friend's mother would always tell her the story that she was delivered by a German doctor who still had his SS boots on. So who knows whether that was really the case, but it was clearly on the minds to stick with the mother, to tell the daughter that is how she came into the world. That was a really key aspect of the medical milieu in the DP camps.
That's an unbelievable story. That's a really striking story. Will you expand on how the micro and macro apply to prisoner physicians, and how you think that would apply to DP camp doctors?
So, as I mentioned at the beginning, the the micro and macro with sort of that dual investigation of the prisoner physicians has given me insight into these larger dynamics. I've been able to use the prisoner physicians to shed light on the trajectory, the dynamics between the Nazis' dual pursuits of the exploitation of Jewish labor and the extermination of the Jews. So it's an incredible lens through which to see much larger trends. But at the same time, I'm also looking at what was going on in the camps and what's important to me, what I want to convey in the coercion resistance spectrum approach is that everything comes down to room for maneuver. And that actually connects the larger scale to the personal level, because these larger trends impact what's going on the ground, and that sort of delimits the space in which the prisoner physicians could act. So, for example, let's see, what's a good example? In Birkenau, for example, there were mixed messages sort of from the much larger level of the SS main office for the SS economic and administrative main office. The desire to cut down the fatalities in Birkenau in favor of preserving the labor force, for Jews to be whatever ounce of strength they have, for that to be put towards labor. So that led the head doctor, Eduard Wirtz, of the Auschwitz camp, the chief garrison physician, that was his title, to actually recruit Jewish doctors before, so this is spring of 43, before that point, at least on the men's side, Jewish doctors were not tapped to utilize their medical expertise, their training in the camp hospitals. But these larger trends, what was required by the German war effort, that led to doctors gaining the opportunity in the first place to help. And then from that point, then you can go down to that micro level and examine. I, of course, could go on and on about this, but I want to leave time for other questions. As
yes,
for,
we have 35 more questions.
Woo, I'm so sorry.
We won't be able to get to all of them.
Yeah.
If I see that we have a number of questions where people were born in the camps or had parents who were in the camps.
That's so exciting.
So this is very exciting. I've tried to write to a few of those people with my email.
Wonderful.
Any emails to Sari, so please get in touch with JDC Archives. We'll forward your message because it's a bit hard to read all those messages, but I see that we have many.
That's so thank you so much for your desire to communicate with me and get in touch. It will just greatly enrich this project. So thank you all for making that happen.
We have a more general question. How are there so many Jewish doctors available to work in the camps?
Which camps?
I think it's a general question.
how are there so many Jewish doctors available to work in the camps? So, I guess we would have to go back to Jewish history and to look at the importance of the medical profession there, and various dynamics, politically, socially, economically, way beyond the scope that I'm dealing with here. All that to say, a lot of Jews became doctors, and then they could act as doctors in the camps.
Someone asked if there was any kind of psychiatric care at the hospital. I guess.
Psychiatric care, yes. There was definitely an awareness on the part of UNRWA, the JDC, and the Central Committee, an awareness that that the people coming out of the camps had been through so much and would certainly need psychiatric care. So one of the facilities that one of the kinds of facilities that the JDC wanted to establish was psychiatric facilities. So there were TB sanatoria established, but also sort of mental health sanatoria.
What was the latest date that Jewish DP doctors served in the DP camps? Do you know the percentage of Jewish DP doctors that came to the US versus Palestine?
No idea yet, but that's a question, especially if I focus on the later end, the trajectory, that I would really love to find out in terms of where they dispersed. One thing that I did read is after Dr. Grinberg went to Palestine, he eventually, I think just a few years later, immigrated to the US and settled in New York. So even once a doctor went to one destination from the DP camps, there was the possibility of movement to somewhere else.
Were you able to identify doctors who also helped in ghettos?
So in Dr. Grinberg's case, I believe he was a doctor in the Kovno ghetto. Just wanting to gain so much insight into to his life, I would love to examine sources that explore his involvement there. But right now, I don't have that. And because the focus of my dissertation work was on Jewish doctors in Nazi camps, I can't speak so much to doctors in ghettos. However, if you have any question about Jewish doctors in ghettos, Miriam Ofer is the person to speak with. She is the expert. So I would send you her way for insight into that.
We have another question. Well, we have many other questions. It's a bit hard to. We have a few questions about the main historical questions you're looking at, and your thesis. So I will just go with one of them. What are the fundamental historical questions you are asking? It sounds as though the focus is on the structure of the appointment of physicians and their payment rather than their service or conflicts. Could you please share your thoughts? And then that person added, Leon Falik ended up a well-known and respected obstetrician in New York City who was an active member of the Jewish emigre physician community. We have a similar question, which is, what is your overriding thesis about Jewish doctors in the DP camp? I think the two questions are a bit similar.
Right. So I'm just beginning with casting a wide net out there. I don't have any particular thesis in mind at this point. I want to see what the sources tell me, where they're going to guide me. I know that the sources are out there, and I've sort of dipped my toe into the pond, and hopefully we'll dive into that pond very soon to come up with a better idea. The focus of this talk being on payment, etc., that was really something that I wanted to bring out for, well, in this venue. It is not exactly a reflection of the direction I plan for the overall project. As I said, I really want to look at the micro. I want to get the voices of the doctors into whatever the final product of this project is. That's very important to me. I want to know what it, so one of my questions is, for that micro level, is what was it like for these doctors to emerge from places so defined by death and then be in a position to deliver babies in the DP baby boom? What was it like emotionally for them when they were losing patients at the early stages, people whose bodies were so ravaged by malnutrition and disease that they were too far gone, even with medical attention being provided to them after liberation? What was it like to be on the other side of liberation but still lose those patients? So those are some questions I would really love to get at, and hopefully they're in the source materials. So I would love to be able to bring, as I said, the macro together with the micro, take the same large scale approach that I took with my dissertation project and bring it here to see what I can come up with.
We also have a question, and I think we'll take just like maybe one or two, because I know you've responded to many.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay, so let's go for more than
yeah.
two. Who made up the nursing staff at the DP camps and hospital?
So that was, as with the doctors on staff, a combination of DP nurses and German nurses. So in the case of St. Attilian, there were German doctors who stayed on from the phase of it being a German military hospital into the phase when it was a DP hospital. At that point, they took their the German medical staff took their cues from Jewish doctors who became the administrators of the facility. But nevertheless, German doctors and nurses were still on the scene. There were too few doctors and nurses available within the DP population, and in terms of the numbers of doctors UNRWA could recruit and the JDC could recruit, everything needed to be supplemented by the local population. And as I mentioned before, in response to someone's question, there was a lot of emotional trauma wrapped up in the involvement of German doctors and also German nurses on these medical staffs.
Where did the international doctors come from? I suppose their country of origin of some of those doctors.
The DP doctors or the recruited?
Well, I mean, I guess the international doctors could be the recruited ones.
So because the UN is such an international organization, because the JDC is such an international organization, their reach was quite large to pull doctors from all over the world. So in terms of doctors who comprised the more administrative hierarchies for medical matters, I've seen many from France. I believe I came across one from Central or South America. There were doctors recruited from the US for sure, but the humanitarian need of this DP population coming out of the camps, out of hiding, it was a major crisis. So I think the calls just were for all hands on deck. Whoever could do it, come. And one story sticks out in my mind. This is from the British zone at Belsen. A whole team of medical students were tapped to help out there, and that gave them a medical education they had never anticipated.
So I don't know if you know the answer to this question. How many doctors were employed by the JDC, and how many of those physicians immigrated?
That I don't know. And then if we're talking employed by the JDC, are we talking about the doctors who were on the bureaucratic side, the medical officers on the different levels? I believe that UNRWA was responsible for some of the salaries of the doctors, of the DP doctors. So there are different places I need to look and lines to follow to get at those answers.
Someone would like you to comment a little bit more about the baby boom in the DP camps.
Well, generally, the sense was, in so many cases, and I'm drawing from Atina Grossman's work here, that the Jewish population was decimated by the Nazis, and the sense was among so many DPs that they were responsible for keeping the Jewish population going, trying to rebuild from all of the destruction, to create new generations of Jews. So that was one of the driving forces behind the baby boom. People looking for love, for family connections after losing so much in the camps, in the ghettos. It was a matter of, in a way, starting again, in a way, recognizing the loss, the past. So on so many psychological levels. But I really have to turn to Atina Grossman's work on that and say, if you want more insight, go to her.
Did you come up upon any DP doctors who had actually collaborated with the Nazi?
So that gets me into my belief about the use of the term collaboration. And that's a term that I try to avoid, and I try to flip the narrative and look at, as I mentioned with this coercion resistant spectrum, I look at it in terms of the Jews having been coerced into certain behaviors because of the gross power dynamic, the gross disparity between the stature of Jews in these camps and that of the people giving the orders, the SS. So I stay away from the term collaboration, and because my my database is for DP doctors is still really small. I haven't been able to make so many connections, but one could say that in order to for any Jewish prisoner physician to maintain his or her position, to help, that person needed to do enough to maintain that position, to follow orders to a certain extent, in order to help. So unfortunately, a lot of people looking at the situation might call that collaboration. So in the case of Spanier, whom I mentioned, in the collection camps in Munich, one of his responsibilities was determining whether people were fit for transport to the East. So how does one view that? That the position enabled him to give medical care to people who needed it, injured people, sick people in these camps, but at the same time, he was responsible for essentially signing off on sending people to, at that point, it's unclear whether he knew that it was certain death, but definitely a much more precarious existence outside of Munich.
So someone asked if you have a website. Do you have a website, Sari, for people who want to have more information about your research? Or
nope, not yet, but that's actually a thought that passed through my head, that that maybe I should have more of an online presence. So thanks for giving me, I guess, more
incentive.
Yeah, there we go.
And now we have a very medical question for you. My late partner was told he had TB after he was liberated. How was this diagnosed while in the DP camp?
So I believe that I included a picture of an X-ray machine at St. Attilian. One of the ways of addressing TB was just the mass X-raying of entire camp populations, because there was a desire to separate those with active infectious TB, send them away to sanatoria elsewhere, and to keep an eye on people who had TB but who didn't have active transmissible cases at a given point. So the desire was really to just test and know as much as possible. So that was a crucial initiative for health teams in all camps, and it's just a matter of the date by which they could accomplish that goal. So some camps were done earlier, some a bit later, but there was a mass effort on the part of UNRWA and the JDC to get a sense of who had TB. And it was certainly, as you point out, a very widespread disease, highly contagious in the camps, in the camp conditions. So a lot of people upon liberation had tuberculosis.
So the last question is actually, thank you so much for doing this important research and for a very informative presentation. It's literally the last question in our Q&A. There are a number of questions we didn't get to, but hopefully we will have people's email, and people will also get in touch with you.
Terrific. I really welcome that, and I thank everyone for keeping an open mind, being at such an early phase, just sharing what I have so far, and and being so receptive to that. And then I look forward to being contacted and hearing what you have to say about this direction. I'm excited about the project, as you can hopefully see. And I thank Isabel and the JDC for this opportunity to present this, and to the JDC and Sorrel Chesson for the support in the fellowship.
And I want to thank the audience for joining us today. Our next JDC Archives webinar will take place on August 19.